The movie is called Flatbed Annie. There is no flatbed in it, not one. Every moment this film actually earns your attention, it pulls a van trailer, hauling oranges. The title-named equipment that never appears on screen bolted to a truck that was something else entirely. That's not a blooper. That's a signal. The people who made this film didn't fully understand what they had. The truck is a Mack Super-Liner, first generation. 4 round headlights, that extended hood and squared-off stance that made it look like it was already moving when it was parked. When it fills the frame, and it fills the frame constantly, nothing else in the shot matters. Not the actors, not the cocaine subplot, not Harry Dean Stanton's Repo Man driving a Lincoln Continental with steer horns on the hood. The reviewers who remember this film remember the truck. 45 years later, people writing about Flatbed Annie on IMDb still stop to note that the Mack was the real star. They're right. Here's what nobody mentions. That truck was born the same year another company was erased to make room for it. It was brand new when it hit that screen, and when production wrapped in the California desert, it vanished. No auction record, no collector account, no trail of any kind. The title got the truck wrong from the start. The industry finished the job. To understand what you're looking at when that Super-Liner rolls across your screen, you have to go back 2 years before the film was made. 1977, Mack Trucks closes Brockway Motor Company. Brockway had been a Mack subsidiary since 1956, built heavy-haul conventionals out of Cortland, New York, specialized in the kind of demanding, high ground clearance work that required a different kind of machine. Logging, mining, construction, serious weight on serious roads. The truckers who ran Brockways were loyal to them the way certain men are loyal to things that have never let them down. The closure came after labor disputes. Production ended. Most of Brockway was liquidated, but the design work didn't disappear. Brockway engineers had already been developing something, a set-forward axle conventional with a squared-off hood, built wide enough and tall enough to accommodate a larger radiator, more cooling capacity, bigger engine installations. The kind of hood that told you immediately this truck was not interested in compromise. Mack had already been working in parallel on its own Western market conventional, the RS 700. The two projects were converging. When Brockway closed, Mack took what had been built and kept building. By the end of 1977, the same year Brockway went dark, the first Mack Super-Liner rolled off the line at the Hayward, California facility, internally designated the RW 700. The R meant it shared the cab of the R series. The W meant Western. It was Mack's flagship conventional. The truck Brockway had been reaching toward, finished by the company that had just shut Brockway down. There is something worth sitting with in that sequence of events. A subsidiary closed, its workers dispersed, its name erased from the industry, and the machine that emerged from that erasure became one of the most recognizable trucks in American trucking history. The Super-Liner that appears in Flatbed Annie and Sweetiepie was, at the time of filming, barely 2 years old, brand new by any working standard, fresh from a production line that had only just started running, a first-generation truck at the beginning of a 16-year production run it had no way of knowing it would have. It came into the world the same year another company was liquidated to make room for it. February 10th, 1979. CBS, Sunday Night Television. By that point, the trucker wave had already crested. Convoy had come out in 1978, Sam Peckinpah, Chris Christopherson, a Mack R600 with a rubber duck on the hood, and made its money. Smokey and the Bandit had come out in 1977 and made considerably more. The CB radio boom that had been building since the early part of the decade was already starting to fade. The culture had moved on before the television networks had finished scheduling their response to it. Flatbed Annie and Sweetiepie arrived late. It knew it was late. A TV movie budget, not a theatrical release. Shot in Victorville, California, an odd cast assembled from different corners of the industry. Kim Darby, who had played Maddie Ross in the 1969 True Grit as the inexperienced Sweetiepie. Annie Potts, years before Ghostbusters, as the hard-driving Annie. Harry Dean Stanton as a repo man pursuing the truck across California in a Lincoln Continental equipped with steer horns on the hood, a mini-fridge, a typewriter, and what appears to be one of the earliest car phones ever put on screen. Arthur Godfrey appeared in one of his final roles. Billy Carter, the president's brother, by then a minor celebrity known primarily for his beer endorsements,
appeared as a deputy. Fred Willard played the trucker husband who gets shot in the opening sequence and spends the rest of the film off-screen recovering. The director was Robert Greenwald. Before he made The Burning Bed, and before he made a career out of political documentaries, he made this. A trucker comedy for network television on a deadline in the California desert. None of this should add up to anything memorable. The Super-Liner made it memorable anyway. The plot is simple enough to summarize in a sentence. Two women have to keep an $80,000 Mack out of the hands of a repo man and a pair of cocaine hijackers long enough to deliver a load of oranges and make the back payments on the rig. The truck is not incidental to this story. The truck is this story. Every action sequence, every chase, every moment the film generates any real forward momentum, the Super-Liner is doing the work. Outrunning, outmaneuvering, taking hits, and staying on the road. The women are there. The comedy's there. The cocaine subplot is there. But when people remember this film, and some people do remember it, what they remember is a Big Mac moving fast across the California desert with two women who had no business being in that cab, and every reason to stay there anyway.
Here is the full measure of the irony. The title names Annie. The subtitle names the women. The marketing, such as it was for a 1979 CBS TV movie, was built around the human story. Two lady truckers, the open road, independence. All of it accurate, none of it what anyone remembers. What they remember is the Mack. Decades after the film aired, scale model decal kits went into production so that collectors could recreate the Super-Liner in 1/25 scale. Water slide decals, printed on quality clear film, made to order. Multiple scales available, 1/87, 1/64, 1/43, 1/32, 1/25, 1/24, 1/16, a small family business making them to this day, based on the Italeri/AMT American Super-Liner kit. Think about what that requires. Someone had to care enough about this specific truck from this specific TV movie to reverse engineer its livery, source a commercial printer, photograph the original stills closely enough to get the details right, and then set up a business to sell the result to other people who also cared. That level of attention for a truck that was never properly identified in the film's own title. The Super-Liner outlived the film's reputation entirely. Flatbed Annie and Sweetiepie is not a celebrated piece of American cinema. It is a curiosity, a footnote in the trucker movie era, something you find on Tubi at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday if you know what you're looking for. But the truck accumulated its own quiet afterlife in die-cast and model kits, and the careful attention of people who know exactly what a first-generation Super-Liner looks like and why it matters. The title forgot the truck. The collectors didn't. There is no documented post-production fate for the Super-Liner used in Flatbed Annie and Sweetiepie. No auction record, no collector account, no restoration story. No enthusiast forum post with a photograph of the truck in a field somewhere in California. No entry in any database that tracks where it went after production wrapped in Victorville. The IMCDB thread, the most detailed public record of this vehicle that exists, contains a debate about the model year. One commenter cites the DVD bonus features as the source for the 1978 designation. Another notes, correctly, that dialogue in a film is not a reliable identification method. A third points out that the production window for a first-generation Super-Liner runs 1977 to 1984, which makes the truck at least consistent with either year. The thread goes quiet after that. That thread is the paper trail, an internet forum debating a DDD extra about a TV movie from 1979. That is the entirety of the documented record. The truck was working equipment. Brand new in 1978 or 1979, a production company would not have purchased it outright for a television movie. The more likely scenario, and it is reported, not confirmed because nothing here is confirmed, is that the truck was sourced from an owner-operator or fleet, used for production and returned to service, back on the highway, back to the work it was built for. If that's what happened, the odds of it surviving to the present day in any identifiable form are not good. First-generation Super-Liners ran hard.
The ones that weren't worked to exhaustion were often modified. Second-generation cabs swapped in, engines replaced, livery repainted until nothing of the original remained. The Hayward facility where early Superliners were built closed in 1981. Parts availability became a pressure point. Survival required intention. No evidence of that intention has surfaced for this truck. The trail goes cold in Victorville, California, sometime in 1978 or 1979. After that, nothing. The model decal kits are still being made. Right now, somewhere, someone is sitting at a workbench with a 1/25th scale Italeri kit, a bowl of warm water, and a set of water slide decals printed to match a truck that no one has been able to locate at full size in decades. They are doing this carefully, getting the details right, the livery, the proportions, the thing the original had that made it worth recreating. That gap between the replica and the original, between the collector's care and the industry's indifference, is not unique to this truck. It is the condition of almost everything that came out of the trucker film era. The machines that carried those productions, that did the actual physical work of making those films possible, were returned to service and consumed by it. They were not considered artifacts. Nobody was required to treat them as anything other than equipment. The Superliner was equipment. Brand new equipment, built from the bones of a company that had just been shut down, pressed into service for a television movie that couldn't even get its own name right. It ran the California desert for a production and then went back to the road, which is what trucks do, which is what they're for. Somewhere between that road and the present day, it stopped being findable. The collectors kept building the replica anyway. That's the part that stays with you. Not the loss. The loss is ordinary. The loss is what always happens. What stays is the fact that someone decided the idea of the truck was worth preserving even after the truck itself was gone. That is a choice, a small, specific, entirely voluntary act of memory directed at something the industry that created it never thought to protect. The title got it wrong from the beginning. The truck never needed the title to be remembered.